Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Ksenia. In this video, I will be talking about the book I just finished called Summer by Edith Wharton. It had the most beautiful and thought-provoking introduction I've read in a very, very long time by Marilyn French, who wrote a lot of feminist texts, The Woman's Room, which I still have yet to read, and it was so insightful into all of Edith Wharton's work. And she actually calls this book her masterpiece, even though the other ones are kind of more known, like The Age of Innocence, Ethan Frome. She thinks this one is the most masterfully crafted. And she goes on to explain her reasoning, but I thought it was maybe the truth, because this book, it struck me on so many levels that previously when I read Ethan Frome and The House of Mirth, it didn't. It seems a lot more developed, in some ways very, very sensitive. She really embodies, I guess, or goes into the mind of this poor woman called Charity Rial, who was adopted from the mountain, as they call it, where a lot of poor people live, and the conditions there are very poor. And she's adopted by this man of who's much older than her, and his wife. When his wife passed away, she still stays under his guidance, I guess, but he also starts inquiring if she will marry him because he really likes her. But anyways, the introduction. I was kind of upset about one thing. She does give away the ending, and I thought that was unnecessary for her to get most of her points across. I know she wanted to get the small point at the end across about the ending, but I don't think it's good to give away the ending in the introduction. Still, her introduction is brilliant. She goes into Edith Wharton's life and how her main theme was that of construction and the suffocation of feeling and numbing out, and how her works in their own not very kind of active, loud, yelling way, they gave these women a voice. They gave them a depth of feeling that was not expected from her when she was growing up. And she captures it very well. She says that one of her major themes is construction. Appears most powerfully when it is linked with the rules governing the lives of women. Whether she writes about lives lived narrowly inside social constructions or in isolation outside them, Wharton is subtle, delicate, and precise. The seeming innocence of male critics about the difference between a woman's and a man's life, about the profound effects of learning to adapt to the self to a small anteroom in life, has led to an impercepence about Wharton's work. She does not shout, therefore she is not heard. Had he shouted, she would not have been published. I think that is very, very witty observation of Marilyn French, that as a woman writer in a time where ladies did not write, there's that documentary of her actually called A Lady Does Not Write, because her mom told her that, and the whole society, that was like, to work in her time and in her class was considered not appropriate, really. To talk about money and sex was not appropriate. And at root, Marilyn French writes, the greatest sin was feeling. People whose work was the expression of feeling, artists, writers, and actors, were as the class as tradesmen. To care about anything too much was to admit that the small, isolated, independently wealthy group of people was not in fact independent and vulnerable, sufficient to itself on all occasions, superior to and untainted by the grubby concerns and seamy cravings of ordinary humanity. So she was expected to just look pretty and show indifference towards everything. And she had Edith Wharton, she had numerous mental breakdowns before she started writing, when she wanted to write, but then she knew she had that inner conflict of if I start writing, I will be kind of ostracized from her class. And she did end up moving to France and basically living on her own a large portion of her life because her class rejected her. They didn't want a gossip. They didn't want someone who's so critical of their activities. But her like inner view of them made her books so brilliant. This book though is not as much about a rich woman. It's about actually a very poor woman. And I think she still gets into her mind and makes us kind of empathize with her and with her pride. Here, her pride, Charity Royale's pride, is seen as something beautiful. Her depth of feeling is seen as something really, really beautiful. And her awareness of her sexuality is portrayed as something natural, not repulsive, and very like innocent and of course trusting, but at the same time she doesn't want to manipulate people. Like she ends up, sorry, spoiler, if you don't want to hear spoilers, skip over the next like minute. She ends up marrying her foster parent, I guess you could say, because she ends up being pregnant from this summer romance. And she ends up not even telling the father that she's pregnant because she does not want to manipulate him and she does not want to burden him with this weight, you know. And I don't know if it's like completely correct to not tell him, but she gives her reasons very well. And she, the main character, Charity Real, she knows that he's engaged with this woman, Miss Balch. And here, a bit before this, Charity did not know exactly what a garden party was, but her glimpse of the flower-edged lawns of Neddington helped her to visualize the scene, and envious recollections of the old things with Mitchbald avowedly wore out when she came to North Dormer made it only too easy to picture her in her splendor. Charity understood what associations the name must have called up, and felt the uselessness of struggling against the unseen influences in Harney's life. She ended up wearing her hand-me-downs to like a friend, and she was very aware that these influences in his life are stronger than anything she has influence over, and than anything even he has influence over. You know, he's portrayed as a kind of character who is also, you know, tied down and constricted, even as a man, because he knows that he will lose his power, lose his connections if he has a romance with this woman and marries Charity. So it shows, it's a bit, I think, sympathetic to his plight in a way. So it doesn't even give us the like reveal of her telling him she's pregnant and him like turning her down. Charity kind of realizes that he will be in a very tough spot, and that if she manipulates him, maybe it's still going to be like really bad for them in the end. And her pride does not really allow her to manipulate him in that way. So it leaves a lot of gray area, I think, into thinking about what was the right choice, what was the right choice on so many levels, you know. Should sexuality be explored? Should the depth of feeling that a true romance that's not arranged have been explored by women, even if they would have become outcasts or kind of looked down on? I mean, now we live in a very different time, but at least in the US, but her whole exploration of the constriction of societal norms is still very relevant. You know, women are still expected to be mothers, and they're also somehow expected to also be a career woman by many people at the same time, which is very, very tough and requires a lot of extra help. So yeah, our times have changed, but how much have they changed, you know? Oh, and here's a quote of um before even the whole romance starts, before she really starts visiting him frequently. She sneaks out to look at him through his bedroom window, and her not guardkeeper, what should I call him? Guardian calls her out and says, "Charity, you say you don't care, but you're the proudest girl I know, and the last to want people to talk about you. You know there's always eyes watching you. You're handsomer and smarter than the rest, and that's enough. The young man up here ain't had his chances, but there's one thing as old as the hills and as plain as daylight. If he'd wanted you the right way, he'd have said so." Her guardian also offers Charity to try to coerce this young man that she fell in love with to marry her, but she turns down his offer because she doesn't want to be manipulative, and she has that admirable pride, which is in a way her downfall, but we can't help but admire her for it. So overall, it was just so many beautiful observations about the way women feel, the way women perceive the natural world, and their sensitivity in romance. I really love this quote where she explains Charity's feelings or impressions of this guy she fell in love with. "It seemed to be enough for him to breathe her nearness like a flower's, and since his pleasure at being with her, and his sense of her youth and her grace, perpetually shone in his eyes and softened the inflection of his voice, his reserve does not suggest coldness, but the deference due to a girl of his own class." And yeah, and how Charity, she kind of understood just how much was in his hands now that she fell in love with him, and her kind of open-heartedness and passion. It was beautiful, and the ending was sad, but overall, she does leave the reader, I think, with the impression that deep feeling and really experiencing the world fully and following your impulses in a way is what makes people human, is what makes us have rich lives, you know? Oh, and also, yeah, in the introduction, she says that are rich not because of their lives are rich not because of what they are able to take from life, but because of what they are. Thus, in a sense, all of Wharton's work aims towards a definition of what constitutes full humanity. It is not victory over circumstance, but knowledge of the deepest sort, the full living of life. I thought that was so beautifully put, and that's definitely the sense I get from her work. She's also so attentive to nature. Let me see if I can find one. Oh yeah, here. "On such an afternoon, Charity Royale lay on a ridge above a sunlit hollow, her face pressed to the earth, and the warm currents of the grass running through her. Directly in her line of vision, a blackberry branch laid its frail white flowers and blue-green leaves against the sky. Just beyond, a tuft of sweet fern uncurled between the beaded shoots of the grass, and a small yellow butterfly vibrated over them like a fleck of sunshine. This was all she saw, but she felt above her the strong growth of the beeches clothing the ridge, the surrounding of pale green cones on countless spruce branches, the push of myriads of sweet fern fronds in the cracks of the stony slope below the wood, and the crowding shoots of meadowsweet and yellow flags in the pasture beyond. All this bubbling of sap and slipping of sheaths and bursting of calyxes was carried to her on mingled currents of fragrance. Every leaf and bud and blade seemed to contribute its exhalation to the pervading sweetness in which the pungency of pine sap prevailed over the spice of thyme and the subtle perfume of fern. and all were merged in a moist earth smell that was like the breath of some huge sun-warmed animal. There's such a sense of dwelling in all the senses, really appreciating them, really connecting with them, and completely opposite to what her upbringing was, which was that you should show indifference, you shouldn't know anything about sex or money or anything, and you should just be proper and not care about reading also, actually. Reading too much and being too knowledgeable was considered not fitting, unattractive, I suppose. So this kind of full embodiment in both the dirt and the grass and the sun and getting suntanned, it was quite the opposite of her upbringing, and shows that she was a super sensitive person with a very well developed sense of language and attention to every nuance, posture, feeling, the sensitivities of a woman, and how she sometimes, is on the receiving end, and she's very receptive, and all the problems which come with that, especially in a world that is not fair in some ways still, and especially at that point it wasn't. But anyways, I absolutely love this book. I will be reading more of her work for sure. I'll be reading all the books that Marilyn French mentions in the introduction. I think next I will read The Mother's Recompense. Did I pronounce that correctly? I'm not sure. English is not my first language, but I will keep learning it. Keep sometimes actually taking out the dictionary for her books. And let me know what you think. If you read this book, if you want to read The Mother's Recompense with me, let me know. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you found this review, analysis, quote video inspirational, and maybe you'll give her a chance if you haven't read her before. And listen more, a little bit more to some of the women's critiques of her, not the men's, because she was doing something very radical for her time. I really do believe that. And she was, of course, limited by her class, limited by her experience. And we should keep that in mind. Not dismiss her, but see her in her context of her life, of her time. Anyways, until next time, thank you for watching. Bye.